Okay. Should we start? Everyone sitting comfortably? Everyone hear me okay at the back? Sitting semi-comfortably. Everyone can hear me? Great, okay. So first of all, welcome and thanks for joining us today. This is our event on employee benefits for a disruptive world, or a disrupted world. I think I've probably done a few of these type of conferences where I say the same thing, which is we're in a period of unprecedented change. And I've been saying that for a very long time. But I think it's absolutely true, both geopolitically, socioeconomically, businesses and HR professionals are, in a period of extreme challenge. COVID changed the way we work. Then we moved into a cost of living crisis. You've got thematic issues like ESG. Obviously, economic challenges are putting cost pressures on businesses and therefore HR professionals. And yet we need more from our people than ever before as businesses. So this is a really unprecedented challenge that HR professionals face and that businesses face as well. So to try and unpick that, today we're joined by Lucy Adams. Lucy is the CEO at Disruptive HR, best-selling author and former HR director at the BBC. So we're absolutely delighted to have you here today. So thanks for joining us. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Carl. I head up Marketplace at Ben. I've been in the benefits industry for over 20 years, used to lead the client director function at Mercer, most recently, but also worked at Aon, and other list of employee benefits consultancies continues. I'd be delighted to catch up with any of you after. I think we've got some time for some networking after the event, and if any of you have any questions of both Lucy or I, then we can cover those later. So moving on to the agenda for today. So Lucy will do her keynote speech, and then we'll have a fireside chat without the fire. And then we'll do an audience Q&A to finish, and as I said, some networking at the end. If you have questions, please scan the QR code. You can do that now. Hopefully you've all got smartphones. If anyone's got a Nokia 3310, then I'm afraid you can't probably do it. But yeah, please scan the QR code. Hopefully everyone knows how to do that. Put the questions as we go through, and then as we get to the Q&A section, I'll get to the ones I like and ask Lucy those ones. But we'll answer all questions either today or we'll come back to you separately. So without further ado, I will hand over to Lucy. Everyone give Lucy a round of applause, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Carl. And it's really lovely to be here. I hope you're all okay sitting on this staircase. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think my buttocks wouldn't take that. Right. So as Carl said, my name's Lucy Adams. I run Disruptive HR, but also I kind of describe myself as a recovering HR director. I've been an HR director for most of my professional career. And the one you'll have heard of is the BBC, but there were some other corporates as well. And it was really kind of during my time, particularly at the BBC, where, as Carl said, we were going through all these enormous changes, not unique to the BBC. Every organisation has got the same kind of challenges and issues, but we were going through these enormous changes, and leaders would come into rooms like this where we were doing a kind of session, and they'd say, when are things going to settle down? And it's like, well, they're not, are they? They're only going to get faster paced and more challenging. And we had all of that going on. And then there was I still kind of going with my 1980s, 1990s HR solutions. And there was a kind of disconnect. And so I left and I set up Disruptive HR. And nearly 10 years now, I've been trying to discover and create new ways of thinking about HR, our role, how we manage our relationships, the impact that we have, how we build credibility in new ways, and how we ultimately deliver better solutions for our people that are more fit for purpose in a disrupted world. So that's what I'm going to cover this morning. It's going to be a very high level view. All of this stuff obviously is hugely complicated and difficult, and I know all of that. So forgive me if it all sounds a little bit too easy. I know it's not easy, and we'll talk, I'm sure, when we have the Q&A about how do we do some of this stuff. But I should also say that if we don't get round to asking questions, or if I mention a piece of research or that you're interested in having, just email me. Just email me afterwards. It's very easy, lucy@disruptivehr.com, and I'll make sure that I come back to you with anything that you are particularly interested in or answer any questions that we don't get round to. So, without further ado, as they say. So I'm not going to talk about this. You know all of the kind of the big challenges that you're facing. Having worked now for the last few years, pretty much with every geography, with every sector, with every type of organization, from public sector to private sector, large and small, every organization is facing a range of different challenges, but there are four that keep coming up. And those are that every organization is looking for more agility, to make decisions quicker, to be more responsive to changing customer needs, to just cope with the level of change and the different range of changes that keep coming at us so fast. You know, remember the days when we used to do kind of change management plans, and we had a beginning and a middle and an end, and we'd map it all out on a Gantt chart, and we'd kind of anticipate behavioral change in about 6 months' time. And of course, change isn't like that anymore. It comes at us in different ways. It's very often competing and conflicting, and that agility to be able to cope with it is paramount. The second thing that we see with organizations is they're trying to be more productive, particularly, obviously, in public sector, where more for less is paramount. But even in those organizations that are doing well financially, the level of financial volatility that we see means that they are that pressure to be more efficient, to produce more, to cope with more, with less staff and deliver more, is ever present. The third, and this is growing, is the need for greater collaboration, because those geographical boundaries, those departmental boundaries don't make as much sense anymore. And of course, most organizations have operated with hierarchies and silos. You know, I just think back to my time at the BBC, where we had the most unbelievably rigid departmental silos. You know, we had television were kind of like the sexy lot, you know. They had beanbags in their offices and expense accounts at the Ivy, and they were mixing with the stars. They were all beautiful people. And then you had the journalists. At least with the journalists, unlike the TV people would be very nice to your face and then stab you in the back, whereas the journalists at least stabbed from the front. You know, at least you knew where you stood with them. They were all budding Jeremy Paxmans and would always kind of want to know if you were going to resign every time you kind of introduced something. A tough crowd, you know, a real tough group of people, heavily unionized, hated television. Television hated them. They were like these very, very, as I say, rigid silos. And then we had radio people who were just lovely, actually, you know, particularly Radio 4 and Radio 3. They all looked like kind of geography teachers, you know, with the patches on their elbows, and just lovely, lovely people, but very much kind of isolated. And then, of course, we had the future media, the iPlayer guys, mainly guys. And they were just like a different breed, you know. They were kind of very trendy. They would worked at Google and Apple and Facebook, and they didn't see their career in the BBC as being long term. The reason I raise this is that collaboration, of course, became paramount, because they were so used to operating in these very, very rigid silos, where the raison d'etre of the manager or leader of that department would be to protect their own budget, to protect their kit, definitely not to let any staff leave and go to another department. If you left television and went to news, you were kind of ostracized, you know, you're never spoken to again. It was seen as the ultimate betrayal. And yet, of course, television, is it a TV product or is it a digital product? Well, it's both. And so they had to work together more effectively. The first year that we sent one team to Glastonbury, we increased listening and viewing across all devices by 70% because audiences, customers don't care where our product comes from. They just want the best possible product, the best possible experience. And yet there we were trying to get people to collaborate who didn't trust each other, who didn't like each other. So that collaboration challenge is growing. So we've got agility, we've got productivity, we've got collaboration. And then the final one that we see increasingly is innovation. That is the need to innovate, either to kind of, create new markets or fend off competition for market share, or just to do things better, just to improve the customer experience, to innovate, to save money. So those 4 key things, and that's our role in HR, right? In a disrupted world, our role is to equip our leaders, managers, and our organization to be more agile, productive, collaborative, and innovative, to create the conditions where this is possible. And what do we have in our toolbox to enable this to happen? We have an HR manual that was largely written in 1990, and it tells us that if we want a pipeline of talent, then we must review our people once a year and put them into one of 9 boxes in our 9-box grid, and we will against a performance and a potential axis. Our manual tells us that if we want our people to be energized and enthused and excited about working for us, then we need to do an annual engagement survey. An annual engagement survey that we work really hard to try and get everybody to fill in. I remember one year at the BBC, my team had T-shirts saying, "Now fill out your survey." And people were throwing stuff at them when they were walking past, happy days. So we then collect all the results in and we go, well, we got 60%, it's better than last year. And we send it off to an expensive consultancy, and then they come back with the results that nobody really understands. And then we cascade the report, and then we collect all the action plans in, and then it's time to start again. And that's our answer for engaged and enthused people. And of course, then if we want our people to perform more effectively, the HR manual that we're all working to is telling us that we must do performance reviews, a performance management system where we set objectives at the start of the year and then review them at the end of the year, take people into a room and sit them down and tell them that their meets expectations, and then try and persuade them that that's actually good as they look desperately disappointed for the 4th year in a row. These things have never really worked. And they certainly don't work in a disrupted world. So what can work? What are these key trends that we're seeing? So apologies, that's a little bit small. I'm hoping that you can read it. But the trends I want to share with you that we see, these macro trends, and I'm going to go into them in a bit of detail and give you examples of what this looks like in practice, how other organizations are driving these trends, is employees as adults, consumers, and human beings. So Stella, you know all about this because Stella's worked with us before. So employees as adults, consumers, and human beings. And these are the kind of overarching trends that we're seeing with the more progressive HR teams who are driving a different type of agenda, who are trying to equip their people to be more agile, productive, collaborative, innovative, to equip their leaders, their managers, and their employees for a disrupted world. So let's have a look at adult. Most organizations are incredibly parental. Every organization I've worked for, many organizations that we work with now are incredibly parental. And we have 2 types of parenting going on. We have the caring parent and then the critical parent. Now, the caring parent comes from a very good place. And it's about taking care of our people. When we say, we're like a family, well, actually, we're not their family, because families don't get rid of people when times get tough, or as tempting as it might be. So we try and look after people. I always use this stupid example to kind of illustrate it. I hadn't been at the BBC very long, and one of my team came to me and said, "Oh, Lucy, it started snowing. it's time to write the all staff snow email. And I was like, okay, the all staff snow email, what's this? And they said, well, when it snows, we write to all our people and tell them they should think about going home. And I was like, what, they can't look out the window? What happens if they don't get the email? Do they just sit there and wait while the snow piles higher and higher? It's like, of course not. They're grown-ups. They're completely capable of making a judgment about the weather and their journey to and from work. But something in us made us feel that we needed to look after them. We needed to take care of them. You know, when you have people that come to you and say, you know, no one's spoken to me about my career development. No one's had a conversation with me about my career. And it's like, how old are you? 14? It's your career. No one's going to care about your career as much as you do. So the danger of treating people like children and trying to look after them like children, back to our key challenges, is that it doesn't drive behavior that is about speaking up, challenging the status quo, suggesting new ways of doing things, taking a risk. What it does is that it makes people passive. It makes people, let's wait to be told, let's wait to have it done for us. It prevents them from using their judgment. And in a disrupted world, we need people to use their judgment if they're going to be agile. What's needed in this situation now rather than waiting to be told? So there are risks with this parenting in a disrupted world. And the other type of parenting that we have is the critical parenting. And this is where someone somewhere has done something wrong. So it's like HR, you must create a rule, a policy, a process to prevent that behavior ever happening again. One of our clients was telling us that they had this fantastic freedom to bring your dog to work. And it was great, you know, people were just brilliant in how they coped with it and loved it. And then one day someone bought a dog with fleas, and immediately the response is, we need a policy. We need a policy about dogs with fleas. And it's like, seriously? Let's just ruin a good thing by putting in place more policies, more rules. So we smother our organization in these rules and policies and processes at a time where we need people to be speaking up, taking a calculated risk, embracing new ways of doing things, coming up with new ideas. And instead, what they're doing is waiting for permission or approval. And we're frustrating the majority of people who have no intention of behaving badly. The vast majority of our people want to come to work, do a decent job, treat their colleagues decently, and yet we design around the rogue minority, the 1 or 2% of people who are going to behave badly, but we apply the rules and the policies and the process to everybody. This is stifling for our organizations. So instead, we're seeing a key trend is all about adult to adult, creating an environment where we treat people as if they are grown-ups, and we design around the majority. It also means that for HR, we're not being the nursemaid or the compliance officer, because that's often the role that we're put into. You know, I remember one of my chief execs saying to me, Lucy, I want you to be the conscience of the organization. It's like, seriously? You can't abdicate your conscience to a function. You know, it's like we want to be people who are thinking about creating the conditions where people can do their best work. I don't want to be chasing people for completion of forms. I don't want to be sending out emails because it's snowing. I want to be focusing on the big stuff, because that's where the value added is. So what adult to adult means in practice is that we start from a position of trust. And I'm going to go through these and share some examples of what this looks like in practice. We start from a position of trust. The scary one, managers are encouraged to use their judgment. And this is the bit where we kind of go, oh no, they can't possibly use their judgment. Actually, they can, but I think the caveat to all of this is that we have rubbish managers in some roles, right? We just do. We've promoted people into people leadership roles, line manager roles, who should be nowhere near other human beings. It's not what they want to do. It's not their strength. They were good technically. They're great individual contributors, but they wanted progress. They wanted to be promoted, all valid stuff. So we give them people to manage. Now, how much of our role in HR is going to be compensating for those poor managers? And I think that's a question There's no right or wrong answer to that. But I do think it's a question we should ask ourselves. Is our role to compensate for poor managers, or is it actually about working with those who can use their judgment with some encouragement and some support? And then it's also about employees driving and owning their own performance, their own careers. So let me just break that down a little bit and give you some examples. So we've got some examples here of some companies that have looked at how could we show trust from the outset? How can we design our rules, our policies, our processes in a much more light touch way? So we've got PwC, and like many organizations now, looked at their probation. I mean, just the word probation. It's for criminals, right? It's criminals. You join an organization, we spend a fortune bringing them in, and then we put them on probation. It's like, really? So PwC, they said, we trust you enough to hire you. We trust you enough to pay you, to put you in front of clients, to use company equipment. We trusted you enough to lure you away from another organization. So we're going to trust you from the outset. There's no probation required. Interestingly, Virgin Atlantic did this, and they said, well, let's have a look at how many people actually fail their probationary period. And out of 10,000 staff, 2 people on average failed their probation period a year. So they got rid of it, and they said, let's just call it a getting to know each other period. It doesn't have to have this kind of, this idea that you have to pass your probationary review. So getting rid of probation. Motley Fool Finance Company, they said, we're just going to treat you like adults to be trusted. We're not going to track your time off for sickness. We're not going to track your time off for holidays. You own it. You do it for yourselves. Interestingly, we piloted something at the BBC we piloted it, the take as much time as you, holiday as you want. And we piloted it with the Natural History Unit, you know, the guys that do the kind of Planet Earth and Blue Planet and stuff. And I mean, it went really, really well. We didn't roll it out because we were in the middle of the Jimmy Savile crisis. I don't know if you remember that, but and also taking away defined benefit pension schemes again. Just a laugh a minute during those days. But it worked really well because suddenly people are being trusted. So it's another example of where the starting point is that we trust you. At Trust Power, they reviewed all of their policies. They reviewed all of them. Now, interestingly, they got their policies down from 19 to 5. But they also said, let's look at those that don't promote autonomy and change them and get rid of them. Let's have a starting point, which is that we trust you, and let's review our policies from that lens. And then a company called Soundstripe, they kind of make the point, this is not a hippie commune. Being adult to adult is not anarchy. It is about, yeah, giving greater levels of freedom, but it's also about increasing the sense of responsibility that we have. And this is from their kind of employee handbook. Now, this isn't going to work for everybody because the kind of language is very informal. If you're working for a firm of lawyers or something, they're probably not going to respond particularly well to this. But what it does is it uses common sense. It's saying things like, you know, stay home with a sick child, not how many days you are entitled with a sick child. It's about, you know, don't come to work naked. It's kind of being a little bit tongue in cheek. I prefer, you know, dress for your day, which is Legal and General's approach, rather than trying to define what dress code. Oh, life is too short to have to write dress codes, isn't it? As an HR person. The whole point here, it's about, we will give you more freedom. We trust you, but your sense of responsibility is paramount. Another part of this kind of trust treating people like adults is, of course, our approach to hybrid working. I'm going to do a show of hands in the room. Apologies for those that are looking online, but how many of you have got a hybrid working approach? So most of you. How many of you specify the number of days people need to be in the office? Again, most, I think. So I think what's a real shame is that actually hybrid working, hugely beneficial, right? So hugely beneficial in terms of attracting a wider talent pool, meeting different needs. But what we've done is we've applied that old-fashioned thinking, that parental thinking. So we say, well, you must come in 3 days a week. Why? Why do you need to be in 3 days a week? For some people, that isn't enough. For some people, that's way too much. But it's all about the work, isn't it? It's all about what's needing to be done. So I think it's a shame that we've kind of retreated away, because quite often it's managers who are saying, I can't cope with this, I need a policy. And HR have responded and we've given them this 3 days. Or it's leaders saying, I don't trust people to work from home, I need to see them in the office on a regular basis. So this lack of trust, you know, I was talking to a leader recently and he was saying, you know, I really want to get rid of our working from home approach because, you know, there was this person and I know they're not working, they're not being productive. And I said, well, were they really productive before you had hybrid working? Well, no. It's like, well, why didn't you deal with them then? Why didn't you deal with the individual who wasn't performing? Not change your whole approach because of one bad person. Hybrid working does not make people unproductive. So I really like this approach, which I think both of them show a real adult-to-adult approach to flexible working. Swiss Re, they have a mantra which is own the way you work. What they mean by this is that you're a grown-up, you know when you're most productive, you know where you're most productive, you know what work's got to be done. You also know your home responsibilities, you know your social obligations, your caring responsibilities. But it's not anarchy. We don't always get what we want. That's part of being a grown-up, isn't it? It's through discussion with your manager, and it's about having a conversation with them to make sure it works for the organization, for the team. So it's done through conversation between a manager and their team member to find something that works. And that might mean they don't get everything that they want. I also like Crown Prosecution Service. So, you know, public sector organization, this is not the preserve of the corporate world. And they said to their managers, we're not going to ask you to specify the number of days they've got to be in. But of course, getting together and coming together matters. So what we're going to do is we are going to say to you, use your judgment, and when it has purpose and value, then agree with your people that they'll come in. When it has purpose and when it has value. So it's all about that kind of judgment call from leaders rather than this old-fashioned thinking of 3 days in, 2 days out. It's about the work, it's about the individual needs. It's about flexing and accommodating that as an organization. So, we talk about managers using their judgment. I apologize, you don't need to read all of this on the left-hand side. You'll get the gist of it. It's a kind of classic bereavement policy where we outline how many days grief people are allowed. All right, so if it's a close relative, then you're allowed, I think it's 3 to grieve. And if it's a less close relative, then you're allowed 1. Now, it does say manager discretion, but the fact is that we're specifying the number of days people can take. How do we know what they need? And then on the other side, you've got an example of an organization, Prisciat, they're a kind of price comparison site, but it just talks about we've got your back. Take the time you need. It means that a manager who knows their team, who knows the one whose grandma's died for the 3rd time that year, you know, versus those people who are suffering and who need more time. It's about being human. It's about treating people as grown-ups. It's allowing managers to use their judgment. Conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz on. I mentioned that the final part around adult to adult is also about employees owning and driving their own processes. So Vistaprint, they kind of have got rid of, like many organizations, the ratings, the forms, this once a year thing. You know, can we manage someone else's performance? I'm not sure we can. You know, if I want to go to the gym, then I'm going to put the effort in. If I don't want to go to the gym, I can be incentivized. I can be told I've got to. And I'll probably just end up sulking and walking around the gym listening to my podcast to prove that I've been. but I won't put the effort in. Ultimately, it comes down to individual need, want, desire. And our managers, I think, can create the conditions where that becomes the case. But actually what we're seeing is employees owning and driving their own performance, their own feedback. If I sit you down, and apologies pointing to you, but if I sit you down in a room and say, can I give you some feedback? That has the same impact on the human brain as someone running up behind us at night wearing a hoodie. All right, it's immediate shutdown, fight or flight, whereas we want them to be curious and leaning in and open. And that's where the kind of Vistaprint model comes, where employees seek their own feedback. It's their responsibility, and the manager becomes the coach to help them think through and work through, what does this actually mean in terms of improvements to their performance? Employee-owned performance management. At Viacom were going to, it was just about before when COVID hit, they were about to launch this classic HR-led mentoring scheme, you know, where we kind of write all the policies and what it means to be a mentor and all the rules. And of course, COVID just put paid to all of that. So instead, they said, look, I tell you what, if you feel that there's someone in the organization that could help you be better at what you do, or you're interested to learn from, then fix a call with them. Do a Zoom, do a Teams. Now, of course, meet them. Have as many as you want, as few as you want. Sort it between yourselves. And it has gone down so well instead of this highly prescriptive approach, employee-led learning. River Island, they say, you know what, no one's going to care about your career as much as you do. It's your responsibility to drive it in conversations with your manager. It's not, of course, the manager will meet you halfway and we'll talk about ideas and so on, but ultimately, you bring it up when you need a conversation, because we all want different conversations at different times. Instead of this set piece, career development happens at the end of the year if we've got time at the end of the meeting after we've done the objective reviews. And then bizarre voice and approach to onboarding. You know, that classic onboarding hell where we do it to them and we sit them in a room and we show them 95 PowerPoint slides. And why do finance always want their org chart in there? I never understand that. You know, it's really important they know the finance org chart. But instead, what they do at Bizarre Voice is they say, you're a grown-up. Here's some people we want you to meet. Here's some information we want you to digest, some places we want you to visit. Over to you. Now, we'll check in with you and make sure that this is happening. Again, it's not a hippie commune. It's not a free-for-all. It's important and it matters. But ultimately, it's your responsibility to drive that. And I think at Ben, you have a sort of little bit of money for people to do their own onboarding, which I really like, and that will be appearing in my presentations from here on in. So here at Ben, they have like a buddy allowance. So when you join, you've got a small amount of money. And if you want to take someone for a coffee or take them for lunch, to help you get better at becoming part of the organization, becoming more effective, then do it. No questions asked. There are simple ways that we can do this. It doesn't have to be the big stuff. So, adult to adult. And again, if you're interested, write to me and I'll send you the research here, which is a really interesting piece of work that was done by Paul Zak. If we treat people as grown-ups, then they are more productive, they are more innovative, they're even less stressed. And if you think about it, think about the best time you had at work, the best manager that you ever worked for. Chances are he or she would say things like, I trust you, use your judgment, or I don't know, what do you think? They would give you that autonomy in that space to do your best work. How am I doing on time? I better really hurry up, hadn't I? I've got two today. They're quicker. Apologies. I get really excited by this stuff. Right. Let's quickly do consumer. So, you know the expression, employees are our greatest assets? Isn't that a horrible expression? Assets are buildings and computer equipment and cars And yet we in HR deal with human beings, beautiful, wonderful, incredible, frustrating, annoying human beings who are all different to one another, who all have different needs and wants and preferences. You know, in my human life, if I want to go and buy a pair of jeans, then I want different sizes, different styles. I want different price points. I want my individual needs to be catered for. And yet in HR, I, as an HR director, would feel really proud when I had a universal process for everybody, treating people exactly the same. This idea that if we treat people consistently, then we're being fair, as opposed to seeing fairness and consistency as very different things. We don't have to be consistent to treat people fairly. In fact, I would argue that treating people consistently often leads us to being unfair. So what we're seeing is this second macro trend in HR to equip our people for a disrupted world is consumer. And there's a couple of aspects to this. It's about HR identifying employee persona. I'm sure many of you are already using employee persona. It's a marketing technique that we've adopted. And what we do is we look at 2 or 3 or 4 types of people that work for us, and we shape and provide choices based on those persona. So 3M, they use persona for, think about talent management approaches. They asked, what was the motivation for people to work at 3M? You had people who they called it in it to win it, the highly competitive, highly ambitious. You had in it for my life, those who wanted more of a work-life balance. And then you had in it to experience it, those people who were interested in growth, curiosity, always learning. Different types of approaches, different choices that they could provide for. Mondelez, they have an approach which is all about understanding how people want to work from a hybrid perspective, providing different choices, including thinking about the benefits that go along with that. Because just providing in-office benefits, you know, free pizza in the office, everything being centered around that. So they've thought very carefully about the different persona and how they want to operate and interact with Mondelez. Telstra, rather than one size fits all, flex benefits, just a kind of broad package that people didn't really understand, what they did was they used persona to really think through, how do people want to be rewarded from a total compensation perspective? So you might have somebody that really wants a kind of high bonus structure, can take more risk. You've got others who've got, you know, young kids and a mortgage, and it's like, just keep my cash at a certain level, and these are the kind of benefits that I'm looking for. Different types of tailoring. So yes, of course, we've got flex benefits, but it's about what do they actually need and want? Who are the people that work for us to help them with the messaging to make sense and navigate the kind of benefits that might work for them? And then at Red Bull, you know, we've had the kind of the brand police over our recruiting for so long. Everything's got to look absolutely identical. And Red Bull were like, why? We're trying to recruit different people. We want different imagery. We want different language. We want to emphasize different benefits that will work for them. Pointless talking about the great pension you've got if that's going to be of no interest to the people that you're trying to attract. So really thinking through how you differentiate. The other approach to consumer is not so much about HR providing choices, but it's about our role in helping managers really understand what makes their team members tick, helping them know their people better so that they can adapt and adjust their style. So a couple of examples here. LinkedIn, they use stay conversations. So this is where HR provide questions to the manager around that they ask their people informally. It's not a big set piece where they have to fill out paperwork, but they're asking things like, you know, why did you join LinkedIn? Are we meeting your expectations? Am I doing anything as your manager that is really annoying and it's the reason that you left your previous job? Or my favorite question, if you were managing you, how would it be different? Helping managers to think about then how they adapt their style to retain and improve the productivity of those individuals. Wipro, they do problem-solving exercises at onboarding the HR team, and then they share that information with the manager. So what they're doing is they're saying this person likes to learn through social interaction, so let's make sure they get a buddy. This person perhaps lacks confidence, maybe book more check-ins with them. This person is all about trial and error. Just give them some space, give them some clear outcomes, and check in with them perhaps less frequently when they need it, when they'll come to you. They're very confident. They saw their turnover in the first 6 months drop by a third when they implemented this. And then Thrive Global, they asked people when they joined, tell us about your best reward you've ever had at work. Tell us about the time you felt most appreciated. And their face lights up and they talk about the fact that they got this shout out at work, or they got the opportunity to go on that conference, or they got that handwritten note. You know, our response and our relationship with benefits is so varied. And it's about helping managers to think through what would be not the easy, lazy solution of just the bonus, but the benefits that might be relevant for that individual. The recognition that's going to make that person feel really appreciated. Final one, human. We've been talking about human HR for forever, right? Unfortunately, because we have some poor managers, HR has tried really hard to compensate for them. And that's led us to design policies, processes, approaches that in many ways don't reflect how human beings actually think, feel, behave. I think the kind of classic one is performance management. If you're starting from a position of how do people improve their performance, you wouldn't set objectives that lasted a year. You wouldn't have them sat in a room being told how they're performing, and you certainly wouldn't grade them. You know, as human beings, we can only change one behavior at a time. And so you wouldn't do it in a way with your kids, would you? You wouldn't kind of save it all up and give it to them all in one go. You wouldn't say, you know, I can see little Johnny need to comment on that, but I'm going to make a note of it and I'm going to raise it with him at his performance review in 3 months' time. It's like, it's not human. You would deal with it in the moment. So at Atlassian, they've dispensed with the paperwork and the ratings, and instead their managers ask 3 questions each week. What are you working on? How can I help? And how are you feeling? What are you working on? Ensuring alignment with objectives of the team. How can I help? The leader's role as coach. And how are you feeling? Thinking about the whole human being there. And it works. It's kind of performance management in a nutshell. Performance management in 3 questions, rather than the big set piece that we do every year. At Dropbox, they've realized that when we're being hired, as human beings, we want to connect with the person that we're going to be working for, rather than necessarily HR. So what they've done is they include a video of from the line manager in their adverts. It's a very simple thing. The manager's basically talking about, you know, the role and the kind of person that they're looking for. And they saw their responses go through the roof when they included the manager's little video, because we want to build relationships. We want to know who we're working for. It's a human reaction rather than this big faceless corporate. At Telefonica, they know and they realize that as human beings, if we go on a training program, we'll forget 80% of what we've learnt in a month. 80% just gone. Not because we're stupid, but because we're human, and that's what the human brain does, is it filters it out. And yet in HR, we still very often, our first recourse is a training program. What Telefonica are doing instead is these learning shots. Now, it's not a shot of tequila, it's a shot of learning, but it's 3-minute videos. You know, even the most time-poor manager can find 3 minutes. So it's about trying to really think about what's the best way of getting people to learn. And it's usually something that is much shorter than an all-day training program. And then, and I know you know this one already, Stella, but Western Union. So this is picking up on this kind of alternative to the 9-box grid, a human approach to the 9-box grid and the annual talent review. Instead of saving it all up for a year And instead of then saying to managers, put them into one of 9 boxes, which they very often fail to do, and then we have to explain it again, and finally they do it, and you're like, really? Or you're saying, so this person in this bottom left has got no potential and is performing badly, so you're going to actually be dealing with them, are you? And overnight they jump into the box in the middle where everybody else is pretty much. It's a completely crazy way of thinking about talent, because managers are notoriously bad reviewers and assessors of someone's talent. Again, not because they're bigoted or biased or bad, it's because they're human. And we all suffer from rater bias. There's a great video by Marcus Buckingham. It's only 12 minutes long, but it talks about how ratings of both performance and potential is just bad data. It's just bad data. So we can take a different approach. We know that managers like talking about their people. They just don't like doing the paperwork, right? They don't want to do the kind of assessments and 9-box grids and filling it all out. So Western Union get a group of managers together once a month for a 1-hour talking talent session. 1 hour every month. They love it. It's a really effective way of tapping into the human desire to talk and discuss without having these strange kind of annual set pieces. Human approaches, really putting the human at the heart of it. I won't dwell on this one. Hopefully the slides can come out to you, but I'm really happy to send it. Yeah, I'm really excited by HR at the moment because we are definitely in our 3rd evolution, right? We are progressing. We are no longer the personnel, the kind of tea and tissues brigade, as we used to be called. And equally, we're no longer the kind of overnight where Ulrich told us we were all strategic business partners, and we suddenly started really seem to be doing, our numbers were cut, and then we're basically doing the leadership bidding. Instead, we're in our 3rd evolution, which is where we are enabling people to do their best work. That's our role now. It's such an exciting time. But it does mean that we need to think differently. It means we need to move away from parenting. It means we need to move away from one size fits all. And it means that we need to put the human at the very heart of what we do. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lucy. That was excellent. Thank you. I think obviously people probably learnt a lot from that. So I think for me, it's nice to have someone else banging the drum around the death of paternalism in the workplace. I think from a benefits perspective, there are still so many companies out there that take a one-size-fits-all approach to benefits. You know, it's almost this notion of, you know, we know you, we've pre-selected your benefits for you, here you are, be grateful for them. You know,
and also
catering.
so vanilla, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're so vanilla.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading something which was talking about the kind of, you know, net promoter score for most people, for organizations' benefits, and I think it was like -15.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, it's bland, it isn't differentiated, and as you say, it's this kind of, this is what you get.
Yeah.
And there might be some flex benefits in there,
Yeah.
but it's not really thinking about the individuals that work for them.
No.
It's a kind of bog standard, this is your range of flex, Ben. So I know
Yeah.
that Ben does some interesting stuff in this area, and I think it really is about thinking about the individuals that work for you and that you
Yeah.
hope to work for you in the future.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, that we're in a period now, certainly in the UK and some other economies around the world, have got fairly mature markets in the benefit space now, where the ability for us to support our employees is huge now. You know, it's not uncommon for some companies to have 40 or 50 different benefits that they give employees access to. You know, we're now talking about supporting people through fertility and through transgender issues and, you know, gender dysphoria and those sorts of things. We weren't talking about that 5 to 10 years ago. So there's a real opportunity, I think, to support people through all aspects of their lives, and the acknowledgement that we are all different and we do need different things. So I think we'll start off with so the each model, love it. I think everyone, you know, would resonate with that. But I'm sure a few people are probably thinking, well, we're a long way from that. How do we get the buy-in from internal stakeholders to take us on that journey? What's the process there?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, there's obviously, this is a huge topic, and so I'll try and be brief because, as you've realised, it's not my forte being brief. I think that First up, it is about really kind of working out what's your particular challenge. Is it agility? Is it more productivity? Is it more collaboration? Is it more innovation? And making sure that whatever you're doing links back to that. So it has to kind of talk to the business's needs. It's not just about we need to change our approach to performance management or we need a new benefit system. It's really tying it back to the business need. I think there is plenty of research out there. So I would, always advocate, you look at Gartner, I find them, pretty impressive. Gallup, McKinsey, there's a huge array of great research out there. But in my experience, numbers don't really convince. I think it's, we know that we have confirmation bias where we tend to look for the data that reinforces our worldview. So again, I talked about persona earlier. I think we need to think about our stakeholders and work out who they are, what triggers for them, what are the buttons that we need to press for them, what are the buttons we need to avoid. One business case is not going to cut it. We need to think about how we work with them on an individual basis. And for some leaders and managers, it will be financial. For others, it will be about ego. So, I always knew that with my boss when I worked at Serco, all I had to talk about was what Capita were doing. And he was like, well, we need to beat them. We need, so it was always about the competition. For others, it's about getting them to reflect on their own experience as being a manager or an employee. Because a lot of what we're talking about here is common sense. It's not difficult to imagine it. It can be scary to do it. So I think we can build a case, but we need to be a little bit more sophisticated on that rather than the one business case that's put into the board.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I'm going to dip into some Q&As as well, because there's some questions that are sort of linked to what I'm talking about here. So there was a question which kind of, I guess, ties into what I was saying around if you're starting from a 1980s culture and infrastructure, what's the one thing a company can do to push along that each agenda, I guess?
So I think I mentioned piloting with the Natural History Unit when we were trying out some stuff around take as much leave as you want. And I think identify those one or two managers that are curious, open. They don't have to be the best managers in the world, but they're typically the ones that are perhaps a bit more frustrated with the status quo, or a bit more open, a bit more curious, a bit more willing to work with you. And just get a pilot going, try something out. I would also, don't go big risk. So you don't start with your kind of, anything where there's a big financial implication or there's a big reputational risk. You start in the areas where you are. I mentioned Virgin Atlantic. They worked out that actually scrapping probation was a very low risk exercise for them. So I think the bereavement policy that I laid out, that can be incredibly powerful, but is not going to impact, you hope, that many people. So you can dip your toe in the water. So starting with your early adopters, pilot, experiment. The other thing I would say is kind of avoiding trying to get the biggest resistors on board. Try and kind of just keep them quiet for a while by saying, you don't have to do this isn't for you. Because I think one of the biggest derailers for us in HR is the really, old-fashioned, poor managers, poor leaders who don't want to do any of this stuff. And I know I've been guilty of giving them all my attention to try and get them on board. And I think actually just trying to get the noise out of the system and focus on the early adopters can be useful.
Yeah, no, that's great. Completely agree. So when we sort of think about the common mistakes HR professionals are making, what do you think the top mistakes are in terms of when it comes to implementing HR or benefit strategies, and what are the quick wins therefore? What's the low-hanging fruit, I guess, in terms of mistakes and how to mitigate those?
I mean, I'm reluctant to talk about other people's mistakes because I'm really happy to talk about my own. So that's what I'm going to do. And the mistakes that I made were always this need to be top down. So there was always a sense that we had to start with the senior leaders as role models, and then we were going to cascade through. And we know, because the research tells us, that 75% of change initiatives fail. And the primary reason for that is that they are top down, because we do it in a parental way. We kind of cascade it. Actually, I think that the counter argument to that is, I mentioned early adopters, start really small. It doesn't always have to be this kind of big rollout. The other mistake I made linked to that is that it always had to be perfect. You know, it always had to have the frequently asked questions written and the scripts for managers done and the, you know, the employment policy people squared away and the internal comms people squared away, and everything took so long. And actually, I think finding your early adopters, but going with this kind of minimum viable product, which in sort of normal human language is what's the least I can get away with that I can learn from. So just iterate and try it. And you don't have, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're seeing much more agility in HR and this kind of, the other thing, like Sky does this, I really like this, is that they are always their guinea pigs. The HR team is always the guinea pigs for their own medicine, if you like. And I think that's great. I think that's a really, really helpful way of doing it. So I think this kind of move away from traditional change programs, top down, got to be perfect, mass rollout to everybody, and instead early adopters, agile, test and learn, pilot it. I think, and start small, start low risk.
Yeah. And I think there are some companies that have obviously made a lot of noise about some of the things they're doing. So when I sort of talk about sort of flagship sort of policies or benefits sometimes, and you sort of think about the likes of Aviva, that I think were one of the first to introduce equity between paternity and maternity pay and things like that. Do you think there's much of a much benefit, or is there much to warrant, you know, doing something that then you can make a bit of noise about it and sort of stand on that one thing and then look to evolve from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because as you said earlier, what some people may think that is absolutely amazing, and that will be the thing that makes them want to stay, that makes them want to apply. For others, it's like,
So what?
Yeah, so what? So I think being bold and being loud about your particular benefits, I think there's a value to it, but there's always the risk that it's going to turn some people off, or it's going to have a very low impact. I think this is where the personas can be very useful, and using that marketing technique. So really thinking through which are the ones that we want to shout about based on the people that work for us and the people we want to attract. I think there's also something about being loud about the kind of differentiated benefits. So I think there are some that you would do just because you're decent human beings, but I think there are others where you can really move away from the kind of vanilla benefit approach. So calling out someone like Patagonia. So Patagonia stand for their brand, and their brand promise, their customer promise is all about climate activism. It's all about, preventing climate change, the great outdoors, and their benefits are slightly different, slightly wacky in some cases, but good on them for differentiating. So they'll have things like 3-day weekends. You have paid time off to go and do sport activity of your choice, but they also will pay your bail if you get arrested on climate activism. Not going to work for everybody, but what I like about it is it's saying this is who we are. Sure. You know, it's we are going to do things differently. And I think sometimes we just go for that kind of standard range of benefits that everybody else have, as opposed to saying what's special and different about us as an organization, what do we stand for, and what could we provide that stands out from the crowd. And that, I think, is really worth shouting about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on that, I guess on that theme, sort of pivoting towards benefits a little bit, as that's my default. When we think about offering more choice and flexibility in a company's benefits offering and broader HR strategies, how do we think that can contribute to other key corporate goals like diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging, and more broadly ESG, for example? Yeah,
I mean, I think, it absolutely can. And you highlighted some benefits earlier. The whole kind of trans agenda, the pieces around paternity leave and so on. There's all sorts of other benefits there that we are thinking more broadly about. I think that I want to kind of say two things in relation to this. I think there is absolutely no doubt that thinking more broadly about the range of benefits that we include, and I would include hybrid working within that because it's such a massive benefit, is going to enhance our ability to attract and retain a broader pipeline of talent. But more, it's also going to enable people to be more productive and work more effectively and contribute more, which is both good for the organisation, but also good for them. You know, and speaking as a single mum for many years, trying to balance career and so on, it's blooming tough, isn't it? And so anything around that would have just been heaven, nirvana. So I think it absolutely can help us contribute, but I think it also goes back to the risk that we become parental again. And the more that we can say, this is available, but ultimately it's your choice, you drive and own it, you let us know what works for you, putting the employee in the driving seat, I think is the better option. So I think it's about not assuming that everybody wants this stuff, but it is about as much as possible putting the ability in people's hands to use money, to use their total comp to buy what's relevant for them.
Yeah, and I think I get that completely, and I think from my perspective, I think too often companies are scared to make changes, certainly in the benefits world, because of their fear that employees are going to make bad decisions. Again, which is that parent-child relationship, isn't it? And I think certainly we're seeing a move towards companies offering more choice, and I do think there's an obligation, though, that when you provide choice, you have an obligation to educate, so people make informed decisions, not preach, but provide the right tools so that people can understand what these things are and how they might benefit them. But yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Lucy. So we'll move on to some Q&As now from the audience. So I'll try and pick the nice ones for you. How will AI change the world of HR?
Oh. It's
fascinating.
Nice yeah, it's a very nice one. It's a very nice one. We've just been doing some stuff for clients on this because you can't read the paper, can you, without there being something about AI either really scary or really fantastic. And there's very little kind of middle ground on this, I think. And so the HR people I speak to share the kind of, they're really curious, but they're also really intimidated by it because what is it? It's, and you were talking about the education piece. I think at this stage, just HR getting educated on what it is, what it means, what it can do, what it can't do, what are the pros and cons of it. It's interesting, we're seeing, again, back to that parental thing, we're seeing some organizations like banning it. And that's crazy, that's kind of Luddite behavior, like banning the printing press. You can't stop this stuff, but you can embrace it in a structured and measured way. And I think, we're seeing organizations that are taking that approach where they are they're equipping their workforce, they are training them, they are providing the education, and they're doing it in HR as well. I think what we're seeing is that I think it was about 20-30% of HR leaders in some recent research suggested that they're kind of experimenting, they're dipping their toe in the water. And I think that's great. I think that's what we can do. Biggest area is HR admin, transactional stuff where there is repetition and patterns. And of course, it gets better. That's the whole point. It learns. So whilst initially its responses to a query from an employee might not be great, it's improving all the time. It's learning. That's the scary bit. It's like, how can you be learning? And so I think that's very exciting, but we're also seeing it in obviously recruitment, in L&D and so on. It can be transformational. It's not going to wipe out the need for HR. It changes HR's role. And I think, if we were going to do one thing in HR, it's about learning the prompts, learn how to prompt and then just get on there and try it out. Get onto Chat GPT. I think it's called Copilot now. It used to be Bard, but there's 3 or 4 out there that you can try and just try it out. The thing I would say as well is that it's not like Google. That's how I started using it to begin with. You think about it as being a kind of a knowledge source, and it can do that, but equally, it's much more about creating stuff. So if you want to write a job description, if you want to write a job advert, you can create it really easily. And if you don't like the language, you ask it again and you say, look, we're a much more informal organization. This is our culture. Can you rewrite it? And it does it. So it's saving you. It's not doing the whole job for you, but it's maybe doing 85% of it. So it's freeing us up to do some of the other stuff that I was talking about. Would you mind if someone could get me a tissue? Because I'm sitting here wiping my nose like some snotty school kid. And I do apologise. This is very unpleasant. So thank you. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Thank you.
So I think the AI piece is really interesting. I think there'll be a lot of evolution in the benefit space in AI. It'll be through the support that employees have in terms of navigating all of the complexities of benefit strategies, but broader than that. But I think that the scary bit of AI really interested me as well. I watched the Diary of a CEO podcast with Mo Gaudet, and I got a bit scared when I watched that. I don't know if anyone else has seen that.
So much. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, no worries. So we're gonna, I'll ask the next question. So big focus on, there's still a big focus on EVP and values. Does it still matter? Does the employee value proposition still matter?
So I think there's 2 questions there. There's the values piece and value statements and the employee value proposition. I think the employee value proposition matters more than ever because we need to differentiate ourselves in the market. And again, you read most job descriptions and most job adverts, and they just leave you feeling so like meh. There's really little differentiation. It's getting a lot better, but I think being very clear on the experience that you want people to have when they join your organization, how do you want them to feel? So that's I think again a whole other topic. But employee experience, I think, is a real game changer for HR. So instead of the dry terminology of EVP, it's about how do we want people to feel and how do we create that environment and that experience for them. And interestingly, as an HR director, I rarely ask myself the question, how do I want them to feel? Which is slightly unnerving, really, isn't it? When we should be all about human beings and emotions and experience. It was usually, what's the process I want them to follow? So I think the EVP in terms of employee experiences matters more than ever. I think the value statements piece is so 1980s, 1990s. If you look at, I think it's 45% of organizations have got integrity as a key value. They're vanilla. They are like, would you go to anyone who didn't have integrity? Do you have to say that? The idea that we tell employees what values they should have, I think is hugely insulting. I think we're seeing a much fresher approach and those kind of 1980s, 1990s value statements that I have created legions of them and spent years, months debating where the comma should go and whether this word's the right one, and as opposed to the employee experience, and just kind of saying, actually, we trust you to behave like decent human beings to one another and to behave like decent human beings to our customers. That's it. That's what we care about. We're not going to determine that by teamwork and integrity and customer service. And actually, let's kind of get past that sort of old-fashioned approach.
Yeah. So another question here regarding calling it HR. Should we call it people function? Or I think a lot of companies now use chief people officers, don't they, as a title? Does it matter?
I kind of think it doesn't matter. I mean, I know that people disagree with me on this. They say, but language. But I think my hesitation is that we have changed our names so often, but not changed the contents. So we've changed the wrapper, but we haven't changed the content. And I don't think it does us any favors. I think we are far better reshaping our approach and people noticing and then change it to something else. But just assuming that you're going to retitle the function people or employee experience or whatever it might be, and that's going to really wow people, I think we need to focus on the contents first, have people go, this is different, and then by all means call it what you want. What do you think, Carl?
I agree. I don't think it matters at all, to be honest with you. I think it's what you do, not what you're called. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. We've got a couple of questions on the no limits annual leave policy. So I think a couple of people have mentioned the same thing, saying that I think there's some research which shows that people take less holiday when they're given unlimited holiday, which could be obviously a negative. We want people to, to take that holiday and recharge their batteries. So
yeah, it's a really, really good point. And there is absolutely research and that has suggested that in certain cultures of organizations, saying take as much leave as you want means that they actually take less. I think, again, this is a classic thing where if you write a policy, but actually your culture the behavior is different. I always used to say at the BBC, they were like a shoal of fish. So they would suddenly change direction and nobody was clear why, but it was usually because some leader had behaved in a particular way. And people are not stupid. They cotton onto it and they say, oh, so that's how you want us to behave. So that's how we're going to behave. And this is, I think, again, a classic point of, so in short, saying take as much leave as you want, but having a high presenteeism culture is not going to work. I think the hybrid working is a classic example of that, where if you say we value hybrid working, we want our people to work where and when they're most productive, but your leaders are always in the office, then in the end, people will know that that's where the important work is, that you need to be seen because the leaders are always in. They do that kind of classic, oh, you're not in today, and look slightly disappointed. Again, doesn't matter what the hybrid working policy approach says, people will gravitate back to the office. I like what Pepsi did. They had something where they called it leaders leave loudly. Quite hard to say that, but it was basically that kind of I'm going to go and work from home tomorrow. I'm going to pick my kid up from school now. I'm going to the gym for a couple of hours. And didn't matter what the policy said, it was the fact that there was a leader who was doing it. And that was the thing that shaped the culture.
Yeah, I get that. So got a question here around the adult human or adult consumers human model. I assume the answer to this is yes, but any research or reading recommendations in regard to that topic? I assume people can reach out to you and you can connect them, or is there anything in particular?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is tons of research on the adult piece. That kind of, knowing that the more autonomy we have, the more flexibility we have, the more that we own our own performance and that we are given the space with support to do our best work is a highly effective way of improving performance. The human piece is, I think, more interesting because it's usually what doesn't work. That we need to kind of get our heads around. So I mentioned the fact that we put people on training programs. The classic one is that we've used the bonus as a means of rewarding people, whereas we know that actually dangling a financial carrot does not drive improved performance. We know that giving people experiences has a much greater impact than giving money. There's loads of research out there, and I don't think people necessarily need to come to me to kind of ask for the research. You can just Google it. But I think that be wary of using this research as the sole means of convincing your leaders to change. Because, as I said, I think in the end, we have that confirmation bias and we will look to data that supports our own worldview. So I think we need to be much more sophisticated in how we convince leaders and managers.
Yeah.
But if people have got a particular area that they perhaps can't find anything on and they're interested, do let me know.
Sure. I always like the sort of it was a movement a few years ago where a lot of the big financial organizations, the investment banks all wanted to really increase their tech talent within their organizations. And, now investment banks, 30 odd % tech talent within their organizations. And they made a play for the high tech industry, paying obscene salaries, much more than they were getting in the high tech area. But people, and then I think you perhaps would have expected people to move on their droves, and in their droves, and that salary was the salary ruled the roost. But they didn't. It was the culture of the organisations they worked for. It was the purpose, what they were doing within high tech that kept them there. And so you can't really underestimate the value of that, I think, within an organisation.
Capital One, I was talking to them a while back, and they were going through a similar thing, is they needed to attract tech talent. And they were kind of like, but we're a credit card financial services company. And so they put huge amounts into, kind of offices, not dissimilar to this probably, but with foosball tables and this kind of idea that you have to have all of this stuff. And you've got all the older financial legacy staff looking at this and going, what the hell, And what they realized was that the thing that was most effective was getting people to solve customers' problems was what interested them. That's actually what excited the people, and they wanted to solve real life problems. The foosball tables and the free lunches, great, it's nice, no one's objecting to that, but it wasn't the driver. It wasn't the thing that really mattered to them.
So the questions are coming in thick and fast now. We're going to be here till this afternoon, I think. So where are we? They move around as people like them, which is really helpful. How should corporate learning evolve based on today's habits and the fast-paced world we live in?
That's a really good one, isn't it? I mean, I mentioned earlier that kind of bite-sized learning. So again, let's go back to human beings. How do human beings learn? And if you think about your kind of human life, you need to know something. What do? You Google it, right? So you don't go, oh, I must look for an adult education class that's going to start in a few months and go along to that. Well, you might do, but typically you're going to Google it. You're going to watch a YouTube video. Our attention span is that we typically won't watch anything that's longer than 4 minutes. Mm-hmm. So that's another factor. So it's about just in time, and it's about time poor people needing and with low attention spans. So let's tap into that. Then there's the other piece, which is I want to own and drive my own learning. I don't want to necessarily be told what is for me. The days of putting people on mandatory training. I mean, oh God, if ever there was a parental activity, it's putting people on mandatory training so we can make sure that they've done it. So it's about employee-owned, employee-driven. So I think the most effective that we're seeing is where you're having great career conversations and the individual is then having the ability to navigate and explore and do the learning that works for them in a range of media that fits in with how they learn. So it's a much more consumerized experience.
Sure. Yeah. So another question here, there's a lot of talk of freedom and choice. However, the best practices shared seem to be about curating and nudging. Is there a balance, or is it all about freedom?
Oh God, can you say that question again? That's really complex.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk of freedom and choice. So we've talked a lot about freedom and choice today and giving people, obviously, choice and freedom. However, the best practices shared seem to be about curating and nudging rather than full freedom and choice. So is there a balance, or is it all about full freedom?
No, it's not all about full freedom, is it? I think it really reminds me of when I was at the BBC, we were talking about iPlayer and content. And I remember our head of future media at the time said, content is king, but navigation and curation is queen. And that's really stuck with me all these years later, because I think it's a really telling point, and I think it is related to the question that's been asked, which is that, ultimately we want choice. Of course we want freedom, but our ability to make sensible choices is helped by having clear messaging, clarity of where we find things, education around what might be right for us. So just kind of, there's a really interesting piece of research that was done a while ago, whereas if you go into a shop, and I can really relate to this. So does anybody here kind of find Primark or TK Maxx overwhelming? Yeah, yeah. So I go in there and it's like, whoa, I can't possibly. Whereas if you go into a store and there are a small number of choices that work for you, you are more likely to buy from that store. And so it goes. They did it with jam, right? So there was like hundreds of types of jam, and then there was just a few curated types of jam, and the sales were bigger with the smaller level of choice, but based around what they knew they wanted. So I think it is absolutely a blend. It's a fascinating question. It's a really intelligent question, because actually, you know, we've seen those old flex benefits, which has been just throwing the kitchen sink at it, as opposed to focusing efforts on individual choice, knowing where to be able to go for things, understanding how they can access that, the education around it, that nudging, that navigation, that curation is really important.
Yeah.
Thank you, whoever asked that question. That really made me think. Thank you.
Very intelligent question. You're regretting putting anonymous now, no doubt. So we can't call you out on it. So we'll go one more question off the Q&A. So, how should corporate learning evolve based on today's habits in the fast-paced world we live in?
We've just done that one.
Have we just done that one? Oh, right, okay.
We did that one, didn't we?
Did we do that one?
Yeah.
Right, okay, excellent, okay. So culture is so important for us, and inclusion. How do we work better with a more diverse workforce, which will include a lot more minority groups?
So this is a huge topic, so I'm going to try and be really, really quick. I think the whole diversity, inclusion, equality agenda is morphing and changing and evolving all the time. And we know that our historical efforts have not been terribly successful. It's not for the want of trying. It's not, in some cases, for the want of effort and money. But our approaches have typically been around fix the difference, or they've been around a compliance approach. Let's give people a clear business rationale and then set them targets, and they're going to do it, which again is that classic critical parenting approach.
Yeah.
I think that we're seeing a move away from the idea that diversity and inclusion is about minority groups and more about difference of personality, experience, voice, language, and rather than allocating people into minority groups as being a determinant of how they think, feel, behave. I know women are not a minority group, but we often get labelled as kind of, this will work for the women. Why I hate International Women's Day it's just a token type thing, as opposed to, you know, you can have 2 or 3 young women next to each other who will all be very different to one another. So I think it's much more around helping managers to think through the questions that they ask, to make sure that the conversations are not disappearing and going underground, but that leaders and managers can be encouraged to, like GoDaddy did this, where they looked at micro exclusions and micro inclusions, where a leader will work with their team and say, what's the one thing I can do to make you or create an environment where you feel more valued, more appreciated, more willing to contribute? So keeping it really small as opposed to these big diversity, inclusion campaigns and initiatives that are focused on what can often feel like box ticking and covering people's backs. I think it's about keeping it human, keeping it in the conversation. It's difficult, it's complex. And I think sometimes we oversimplify, and I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, great. And I said one more question, but I mean it this time. This one's slightly different. I think it's worth asking. So on the point about experiences over salary, what are your views on providing employees with the opportunity to volunteer and deliver social impact programs?
Yeah, I think it's, if that's what works for them, I think it's great.
Yeah.
For some people, that ability, and this is where I think the Thrive Global example, where people are asked, what's the best recognition you ever had at work, and getting a sense of what matters to them, because some people will talk about that. The fact that they were given time off and support to go and do whatever it is that they wanted to do in terms of volunteering or social impact. So I think it absolutely is something that should be encouraged, but not necessarily, you can do it as a team activity, but it doesn't have to be mandatory. Yeah. It is about individual choice.
Yeah, great. So there's a few more questions on here. They keep moving around, so I have no idea which ones I've asked and which ones I haven't. So maybe we can, if anyone's got any questions from the audience, I don't want to run up and down like Michael Barrymore and strike it lucky too much, but I'm happy to go up. Do you want to take the microphone?
Hiya, thanks very much. So you spoke about fairness and consistency not always meaning fairness. Do you mind just speaking a bit more on that? Because I'm just trying to understand how we can apply it to things like study days and like just days off in general, so people don't take advantage, or just how can we make that fair basically for people?
Yeah. So again, I think that if your starting point is let's design it so people can't take advantage of it, then you're immediately setting yourself up for failure, because what you'll have to do is to prevent that rogue 1 or 2 employees take advantage of study days. And what you'll end up doing is ruining something that could be really positive. So if you kind of look at designing around the vast majority of people who are going to not abuse it, then you come at it from a different angle. So starting from a position of trust. Your question, though, was about fairness and consistency. And I think we are brought up in HR to believe that you have to be consistent to be fair. There can be no room for judgment. There can be no room for interpretation. Whereas I think the bereavement policy that I kind of outlined is a classic example. So my nephew, right, is like my son, all right? He doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't have a relationship with his mum. He's like my boy. But under the terms of that policy, he would get 1 day if I die. It's that crazy kind of thing. Well, if we don't trust managers to use their judgment and we don't trust employees to behave well, then of course you're going to go down the route where you need to be consistent. One of my favourite examples of the absurdity of this was a police force up in Lancashire, and the chief constable was saying to me that he had this great performer, he was this fantastic employee who went to him to complain about the treatment he was getting from HR. And he had said he'd gone to HR because he wanted to donate bone marrow. And he was going to take kind of like, could be a week, could be 2 weeks to recover from donating bone marrow. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know the detail, but there's a lady nodding at the front, so I'm kind of on sure ground. And he just wondered whether he had to take leave to donate bone marrow, or whether there was some flexibility to be given some extra days off to go and donate his bone marrow. And the response from HR was, no, we can't give it to you, because if you do it, if you have it, then everybody will want it. And it's like, really? So people are going to rush to donate bone marrow so they can get an extra few days off. And it's this kind of classic thinking, as opposed to, do our managers know their teams? Do they know? Another good example is the return to work interview. So the return to work interview is designed to reduce absenteeism. I could be managing a team and I could have somebody that is forever taking Mondays and Fridays off. And maybe a return to work interview in that situation might be good. But imagine someone who's worked for 20 years, has hardly taken any time off, has been an amazing, committed employee, takes 1 or 2 days off, and then gets the return to work interview. How insulting, how offensive is that? So I think we do need to accept that there are situations where a manager using their judgment is going to be the best for that individual and that context. Equally, If we treat people exactly the same, we are ignoring the fact that they need and want different things. So if I treat introverts and extroverts the same, if I only ever offer them the opportunity to contribute in a meeting by saying, come on guys, who's got an idea? I'm treating them consistently, but I am ignoring the needs of the introvert who might need more time. So when I had a team, I had this highly intelligent, she was one of my best team members. And to begin with, I thought that she was just a bit lackadaisical and didn't contribute very much. And then her previous boss said, yeah, but you need to handle Rachel differently. You need to give her notice that you're coming to her. And you need to also make sure that the others have shut up for a bit and give her time to reflect. We see people like Amazon doing silent meetings where the introverts get half an hour to contribute to a Google Doc on a shared screen before the extroverts come in and crowd them out. We've talked about benefits as a means of what is going to matter to you is not going to matter to me. You might find it hugely valuable to have that opportunity to participate on let's take the social impact piece. That might not matter to me. Myself and my business partner, as you've probably gathered, I'm a bit of an egotist, bit of a narcissist. I love the big shout out in a team meeting. Fantastic. For her, that's her worst nightmare. For her, it would have to be that quiet word. So if we think about our human needs and wants, the natural thing is to say, let's make sure that we're giving consistency of experience. We all feel valued. We all feel appreciated. We all have the opportunity to contribute. But that doesn't mean we have to be treated exactly the same way. That's lazy, that's old corporate thinking, and that's starting from a position of we don't trust our people to behave decently and we don't trust our managers to manage. And if we stay in that space, we're never going to progress.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
They must be so uncomfortable by now. They've sat on these wooden benches for a while.
Maybe we should let them go.
Maybe we should.
Great. Okay. Well, look, we've got some time for some networking. If you wanted to chat to Lucy or I, we're here. Also, we've got the Ben team wearing the snazzy jumpers at the back. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the platform, then reach out to those guys. And yes, I did just say snazzy. Yeah.
That's like my husband. Whenever I wear anything that he's not quite sure about, he always goes, "Oh, very modern."
Great. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming along, and thanks ever so much to Lucy. That was
My pleasure.
amazing.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Carl.
much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.